Well, good morning, everybody. For those of you that are watching the screen, you are not in Buffalo County, as you can now see. One compliment, I shared this the first session this morning, 8 o'clock. We did put Doug Lewis in charge of the freezing rain this morning with the direction that it stays north, and so he delivered. So nice job, Doug. At our all-staff kickoff last fall, we talked about the message that individually we're pretty good, but collectively we can be great. I would challenge each of you to think about this message today. In our district, we've talked a lot about the 3 R's: rigor, relevance, and relationships. Today, we're going to focus in on our discussions on relationships. Clay Roberts is with us today to share what kids need to know to succeed. Clay will use the 40 Developmental Asset Framework to help each of us become intentional asset builders at the greatest level. Developmental assets is important. It's not some type of new program that we're trying to implement. It's a movement that begins with each of you individually, a movement that will help us help students succeed. As a former educator, Clay comes to us from Washington as an expert in health education. He has served as a consultant in over 40 states and 6 foreign countries, representing organizations such as the Disney Channel, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Clay's message has been shared at over 700 international, national, state, and local events as a keynote speaker. He was recently featured on NBC's Today Show as a prevention expert. Clay has numerous publications such as Building Assets in School Communities and Great Places to Learn: How Asset Building Schools Help Students Succeed. Clay is known for providing practical strategies that you can implement in your classroom. Please join me today welcoming Clay Roberts, sharing Creating Great Places to Learn.
Good morning. It's one of those introductions that you wish your mom and dad were here to appreciate. They are never here at the right time. I want to thank Rick. It is really nice to be in Nebraska this morning. And I'm smart enough, I'm supposed to say it's nice to be in Nebraska. But I'm from Seattle, and if anybody's been following the weather lately, my wife has been sitting home for 3 days without power. The inside of our house is 40 degrees, and the generator quit last night. She wishes I were there, and I'm glad I am not right now. So it is nice to be here. It's really nice to be here. But I got up this morning. This is my 3rd week on the road. And I got up this morning. I looked in the mirror. I look bad. So I washed my face. I thought things would get better. They didn't. So the first thing I want you to know, I look drug affected, and we have a lot of secondary staff in the room. I want to assure you I'm not. I'm sleep deprived. It looks the same way, okay? And then I kind of reflected on why I look so beat up, and here's my last 4 years in review. 4 years ago, I went in for an annual physical to find that I had a 90% blockage in my left main coronary artery, so they had to do bypass surgery. So the next year I go in for my annual physical to find out that both of my bypass grafts have failed, and they have to do a double-barrel stent in my left main because they used the best veins and arteries they had in the first shot, which they don't like to do. And last year I go in to find that scarring has developed over my stents, so we have to do angioplasty. When I said I'm really glad to be here today, you really don't understand. I'm really glad to be anywhere. And I'm not telling you that for sympathy. I'm actually telling you that for 2 reasons. If you have a family history of heart disease, my dad died at 45 of a heart attack, my grandfather at 42. I want you to go out and get checked because I've had very few symptoms, and I got to believe there's some other people in the audience who have the same problem and you just don't know it yet. So that may be the most important message today. But the second reason I'm telling you this is it'll explain some of the bizarre behavior you see up here this morning. First of all, they have me on niacin right now. I'm having hot flashes. Some of you in this room are going, been there, done that. But for me, this is a new experience. I used to have sympathy for my wife. I now have empathy. It's a whole different deal, okay? Also, when they do the surgery, they put you on a heart-lung machine and they stop your heart, and when they restart you, there are memory problems associated with the surgery, and there's some emotional stuff that goes on, which I've been experiencing both of those, and I'm not quite sure what that's all about. But I'm going to apologize to Ron in advance here. I may not remember everything he told me to do here today, but the other thing, they put you on this drug that changes you from a type A to a type B personality. So I may not remember, but I don't give a rip. Which is a really interesting way to live your life. And I brought some of those drugs along with me if anybody needs them. Come see me after the presentation, okay? Now, I probably should have told you, actually, Rick probably should have told you, I'm a recovering junior high school teacher. You're my people. And I made the mistake of spending time out in the hallways on Friday afternoons and on Monday mornings listening to what my kids are talking about. What are they talking about on Friday afternoon? The weekend parties, what's going on? Actually, Monday mornings out in the hallway are more interesting than Friday afternoon, because you get to hear what happened. I mean, I taught in a very urban middle school. My kids were talking about who got drunk and who didn't. They were talking about who got laid and who didn't. Those were conversations going on in a middle school hallway. And when you hear that, you could pretend like you didn't hear it, like it really didn't happen. And when you ignore it and you pretend like it didn't happen, you send a real powerful message. I don't happen to believe it's the right message. Or you can choose to get involved. So we got involved. We began designing and developing programs for our kids. We've developed 5 national model programs.
That's by 5, which is a huge increase. But if you can increase their output by 5.
Thousands of school districts have purchased our programs, and very few are actually using them. That's the first thing I found, which was really disappointing. School districts spend a lot of money. It's sitting on a shelf somewhere. It doesn't make much of a difference in the lives of kids sitting on a shelf. The second thing I found is teachers would say, hey, come into our classroom. We're using your program. And you'd walk into their classroom and you'd watch what they were doing, and what they were doing didn't look like what we had written. There wasn't a lot of fidelity between what we actually wrote and what actually happened for young people. That was also disappointing. But where we saw things that really touched the lives of kids, that really made a difference, it had very little to do with the program. It had everything to do with who delivered the program. You see, I think we have lost sight about what makes a difference in the lives of kids. I don't think it's programs. I think it's people. I think it's you guys that are the most important variable, not the program in your hands. So today, how many of you came here today hoping, right before Thanksgiving, that the district would give you one more new program to do this year? How many of you are one program short? You know, if you just had one more program, you could make that huge difference you always wanted to make in the lives of your students. You know, we are really good in education at telling you what to put on your plate. We're just keeping more and more on, assuming you have room for another new program to do. No one ever tells you what to take off your plate, but people are really quick to tell you what to add to your plate. I don't want to add another new program to your plate today. I don't think you need another new program. How many of you believe there are already some really good programs, curriculums, and models in place in this district for children? Boy, I sure hope so. If you don't, I think I'd look for another job, okay? This is a good district. Not just by your standards. I've had a chance, I worked with other districts in Nebraska. This is a very good district, all right? But Rick was saying this morning, there's a difference between good and great. Let me just tell you the difference in my mind, because I want to talk about how do you move from good to great today. The first thing I can tell you is I believe that good is oftentimes the enemy of great. Because when you think you're good, people are less likely to take the next step, which is going to greatness, all right? Because good is good enough. And let me just tell you the difference in my mind from good organizations to great organizations. In good organizations, a lot of people are doing the right thing. How many of you believe there's a lot of people in this district doing the right thing for kids? Yeah. So I happen to believe that's already going on. But in great organizations, it doesn't matter who you deal with. They're all doing the right thing. And in great organizations, some people go way beyond your expectations. They do things you didn't expect them to do. That's the difference between good and great. So I want to talk about how do you move from good to great today. So it's about people, not programs. And the second thing, I got hired in 1972 because we had a terrible drug problem in King County, Washington. So I got hired as the drug education coordinator out of the classroom. Evidently, I did my job really well because after 1 year, the funding went away. I viewed that as we must have cleared up the drug problem in 1 year. So the next year they hired me as the VD coordinator for the county. This was before sexually transmitted diseases. Evidently, I did my job just as well because after 1 year, the funding went away. The year after that, I got hired as the teen pregnancy coordinator for the county. Teen pregnancy prevention coordinator for the county. Different if you think about that, okay? And get this, they gave us 9 months worth of funding to deal with teen pregnancy prevention. I don't know who came up with this plan, but after 9 months, the funding went away. See, that's how we do things in education. We look at the kids who don't make it. Young people who are violent, young people who drop out of school early, young people who use drugs, and we ask, what went wrong here, and how can we fix them? And although that's an interesting and important question, it's my contention, if you only look at the kids who don't make it, you come up with a skewed view of the world. There's another group of kids that we need to look at. Who are they? Yeah, you need to look at the kids who are doing well. See, the kids who are struggling for a reason. They don't have the answer. You won't learn the answer by looking at them. I'm not suggesting you ignore them. I'm suggesting, though, that you need to first look at the kids who are doing well and ask yourself, what went right here? And how do we make that happen more consistently, more often for all of our kids? Actually, there's a third group of kids who are the most interesting kids to look at. They're the kids who come from adversity and make it in spite of that adversity. How many of you know one of those incredibly resilient kids? I think it's important that we remind ourselves this morning as we talk about this, you have 14-year-olds in this school district who are the most responsible members of their family. They're the kids who get their younger brothers and sisters up and get them ready for school each day. They're the kids who make sure their younger brothers and sisters have had breakfast, that they've done their homework, and they show up in our classrooms reasonably well prepared. You know what? They are the most interesting kids to look at. It's my contention, if we understood what made a difference for our kids who came from adversity, we'd be in a better position to help all of our kids succeed. Does that make sense? Here's what I want you to do. Although I'm not going to talk about a program today, I do want to give you some things to do. So here's what I'd ask you to do. Just turn over your list of handouts. On the back of that list, I'd like you to start a to-do list. Some things I'd like you to think about doing just a little differently. Easy changes in your behavior that I think make big differences for children, all right? The first is, here's what I want you to do. Whenever you come across one of those incredibly resilient kids for the rest of this year, I want you to take them aside, not in front of anybody else. Do not embarrass them in front of other kids. They're ashamed of what's going on at their house. Take them aside and ask them. First of all, take them aside and let them know how proud you are of the hard work they're putting in. It is hard to bootstrap it at age 14 or 16. They need to know some adult is watching and some adult appreciates the hard work they're putting in. You know, it's really hard to bootstrap it, especially if you don't have positive adult presence in your life. You need to be one of those positive adult presence in their life to let them know you see what's going on, you know what's happening, and you're really proud of what they're doing. The second thing, once you let them know how proud you are of their good work, ask them and really listen to what they have to say. Ask them, how do you do what you do? I need to understand this. You're an incredible kid. If I understood how you did this, I think I might be in a better position to help other kids do this. Can we talk about that, okay? I think they can inform our practice. I think we would do better work if we really spent time looking at those incredibly resilient kids who make it in spite of the adversity in their lives, okay? So that's the first thing. We'll add to that list as the morning goes on, all right? So the first thing is, I don't want to talk about programs. I want to talk about people. The second is, I want to focus on what's right with kids, not what's wrong with them. You will do more to shape and change your students' behavior by focusing on what's right with them rather than what's wrong with them, all right? Now, in order to do this, we have a few objectives this morning. The first is I want to share with you a bit of research about what we know about those incredibly resilient people, young people, and the staff that make a difference in their life. I'm going to share a bit of that research with you this morning. The second is I want to make sure that this is practical. Anybody feeling any pressure in this room around academic achievement and performance? And at the same time, anybody feeling any pressure around issues like drug use, violence, gang activity, early sexual activity with your kids? Yeah. Schools are being asked to do more and more with less and less. If we're going to make it as an institution, I think we need to be efficient. So I want to share with you this morning one strategy that gets you two things. We need to be efficient. This strategy gets you higher levels of thriving and academic success on the part of children and lower levels of high-risk behavior, all right? We need to get both, and so I want to give you one strategy that does both. The third thing I want to do this morning is I'd like this to be practical. I've had the good fortune of working with over 100 systems around the country, and we capture what we found in a book called Great Places to Learn. I want to give you examples and ideas from around the country about how to do this, all right? And the last is, I want to make sure you go away with some idea about what to do, because people come to sessions like this all the time. You go away well-intentioned. I have no question about your good intentions, but here's what I learned. Several years ago, I was doing a presentation, national conference, 3,000 adults in the audience, and the person who followed me as a presenter was a 17-year-old young man from Canada. He was the keynote speaker after me. Amazing kid. This young man has formed an international organization that is the equivalent of Save the Children internationally. He engages high school students, mostly in third world countries. He gets them involved in the lives of younger kids to make their lives better. And when he spoke that morning, he quoted Stokely Carmichael. He said, "Don't tell me what you believe. Tell me what you do, and I'll tell you what you believe." You see, it's not what you believe that makes a difference, and it's not what you know that makes a difference. It's what you do that makes a difference. So as nice as it is that we are all here today, unless you do something differently as a result of coming here, we're wasting time, and we're wasting resources, and I don't want to do that. So I want to make sure you go away with at least some idea about what to do differently. Now, this becomes an exercise in precise communication. We have about an hour and a half together. I know that sounds like a long time. My job is to make it feel like a short time, all right? And I'm going to talk fast, but I'm not going to talk at you the whole time. We're going to get you involved in the process. But when I do talk, I'm always worried it won't come out the way I want it to. My first teaching assignment was in Tacoma, Washington. I was teaching 9th grade health. We had co-ed classes until we got to the family life unit, and then we had to divide the kids up. My colleague next door, Mrs. Johnson, took all the girls for the day. I had all the boys. The lesson for the day was about the female reproductive system. I had no visual aids in my classroom, so I drew a diagram on the board of the female reproductive system. What you don't know is I'm the world's worst artist. This diagram looked more like the Schlitz malt liquor bowl than it did the female reproductive system. I had 9th grade boys in the back of my class elbowing each other, and they were whispering things, and I'm sure they were whispering things like, "I don't think he's got a clue." So I'm trying to think of a better way of getting this across. All of a sudden it occurs to me that my colleague next door, Mrs. Johnson, has one of those SPENCO, three-dimensional models of the female reproductive system. So I said to my 9th grade boys, "Wait a minute, I'll go grab Mrs. Johnson's uterus." Not what you want to tell a group of 9th grade boys. And now you know I no longer teach 9th grade health and why I got to do this work on the road. So if it doesn't sound right to you this morning, your job is to stop me and we'll move on. Now, everybody should have picked up a packet as you came in today. So if you take that packet out, I think it has a green cover page. Looks kind of like this, or should. You'll notice there's an evaluation form on the cover, and we put that up front because I usually do better if you evaluate this at the beginning. So if you take just a moment to, no. But I just want to remind you, please fill it out and turn it in at the end. But right behind that, I want to start by sharing a bit of research. Right behind that is a little information about Search Institute. Search is a research institute out of Minneapolis, Minnesota that has been looking at healthy, successful kids for 25 plus years. They've been trying to figure out what young people need in order to succeed. They have a terrific website. I'm not going to spend time with this, but if you want to go deeper, you have that information at the front of your packet. Right behind that, you're going to find information about Search. You're going to find a list entitled 40 Developmental Assets. If you just kind of go to that list, looks like this. It's about 3 or 4 pages in to your packet. One more. How many of you know this list? Many of you do, some of you don't. Let me just tell you my take on this. I came across this work in my work with young people, and it made perfect sense to me. But the first thing I will tell you is I don't like the term developmental assets. I don't think it communicates clearly. It sounds like psychobabble to me. I want you to think of these as the fundamental building blocks that young people need in order to succeed, okay? Look at number 3 on this list. Young people who have 3 or more adults in their life, in addition to their parents, who spend time with them, who encourage them, who call them on things when they're doing things that are inappropriate. Those kids do better. They do better academically. Do you believe that? Yeah, that's what the research says. They are also less likely to be involved in drug use, violent behavior, or early sexual activity. Do you believe that one? Yeah. Let me just tell you, Colin Powell talks about growing up. He said, there wasn't an internet when I grew up. There was an auntie-net. These were people in your neighborhood who acted like they were your aunties, even though they weren't. And if they saw you doing things that were okay, they would say, well, I'm real proud of you for what you did. But if they saw you doing things that were inappropriate, it was likely that they would call you on it, and it was also likely that they would call your parents and tell them what they saw. The auntie-net doesn't exist anymore in our communities, okay? Look at number 9 on this list. Kids who spend an hour a week in community service, giving back to the communities in which they live. They're not just takers, they are givers. Those kids are much less likely to be involved in violent behavior. Do you believe that? That's what the research says. They do, interestingly enough, they do better academically, okay? Look at 11, 12, and 13 on this list. Kids who have boundaries, family boundaries, and school boundaries, and community boundaries, really do much better. Help me out here for a second. How many of you, there's some real wisdom in this room. One of my favorite books is a book called The Wisdom of Crowds, and John Selowicki is the author. And in this book, he says, in a crowd this large and this diverse, the crowd is a whole lot smarter than the guy up front. There's a lot more wisdom in this room than I possess. When you look at the collective years of teaching experience in this room, working with young people, and your own experience growing up, there's a whole lot more wisdom in this room than I possess. So I want to tap the wisdom here for a second. How many of you as a kid growing up knew where the line was? How many knew when you crossed it? How many knew what would happen when you crossed it? Not as clear for many of our kids today, but boundaries are really important in the healthy development of kids. Look at 16 on your list. How many of you as a kid growing up had an adult in your life who expected a lot from you? Yeah. How many of us tried to meet those expectations? How many of you are still trying to meet those expectations? Seriously, how many of you do things the way you do them, even though those people may be dead and gone, no longer in our lives? But if they could see us doing our work today, we would want them to be proud of the way we do our work. And maybe they can. Anybody believe that one? You see, I love this list because there's a lot of rhetoric out there around the fact that it takes a village to raise a child. And I do believe it takes a village. No one ever talks about what the village needs to look like. For the first time on one sheet of paper, each of the items research-based. This is a picture of what the village of Omaha or La Vista or whatever needs to look like. Is that making sense? And how many of you are parents in this room? Or grandparents? Or aunties or uncles? Anybody doing what I did the first time I saw this? Anybody looking down this list and mentally checking off what your own children would say they have in their life? This is a perfect time of year to do this, by the way, because we're going to be with them, most of us, tomorrow and with family. When I first saw this, we had 2 daughters. They were both teenagers at the time. I took this home. I made copies for my girls. I took it home and gave it to them at the dinner table. I asked them to go down this list and check off how many of these they thought we had in our family. If you're thinking about doing this, I just want to prepare you. My girls didn't answer it correctly. I mean, there were several items they didn't check, and I thought they should have, and I got really defensive, and it didn't go really well. Until I stopped being defensive and I just started listening. And when I started listening, here's what I learned. My daughter's perception was their reality. Whether I agreed with it or not was not important. If I thought we were doing a terrific job and my girls didn't see it, what it said to me is maybe we better do it a little differently. But rather than believe me, you will not act on this model because I say it's research-based, and I don't believe you'll act on this model because I say it's important. You'll act on models that resonate with you personally and that are consistent with your own experience working with young people and your own experience growing up. So here's what I want you to do. Help me out for just a second. Doing a little quick exercise here. Take yourself back in time to age 15 or 16. Go down this list really quickly, and I want you to pick 2 or 3 of these that were really important to you as a young person growing up. Okay? They're not all equal. Some are much more important than others. So here's what I want you to do. And with a pen or pencil, you can just make a mental note. I want you to pick 2 or 3 of these that were really important to you personally, and that's from your perspective today as an adult looking back at your adolescent development, all right? When you were 15 or 16, you might not have thought that was very important, but today looking back at it, you go, that was really important that people did this for me, okay? Take just a moment. Go down the list, pick 2 or 3 that were really important to you personally. Now, everybody got 1 or 2 or 3? Here's what I want you to do. In just a moment, when I say find a partner, I want you to find somebody that's sitting close by who is very, very different than you are. Now, I know everybody in this room is very, very different than you are. Let me give you my definition of very different. If you're a man, I'd like you to find a woman. If you're a woman, I'd like you to find a man. Because one significant difference is gender. I want to know if some of the same things that made a difference for young men growing up also made a difference for young women, or whether it was different for boys and girls growing up. And they're not equal numbers of men and women in this room, so another way of looking at this is find somebody who grew up in a different cultural or ethnic group than you're a part of, or find somebody who grew up in a different generation than you grew up in. Really quickly, when I say go, here's what I want you to do, and you kind of need to find somebody close around you, because I don't want to have a stampede here. Freeze. When I say go, you stand up and you do this. This means I don't have a partner yet. When you see somebody waving back at you who is very different, that's your partner. Don't do what I see a lot of adult groups doing, which is, oh, I don't know if I want to partner with him. It's not a long-term commitment. It's a 4-minute exercise, all right? So when you find the partner, freeze. When you find the partner, I want you to just share the 2 or 3 things that were really important to you on this list growing up, and listen to the 2 or 3 things that were important to your partner. See if there's any common ground, even though you're picking somebody who is very different than you are. Everybody got it? 1 minute to find a partner, 4 minutes to do this. Go. hear the train whistle this morning,
Thanks, Lori.
that means it's time. You can finish what you were saying. You can complete the sentence. Thank your partner. And thank you guys for doing this. Just out of curiosity, how many of you found common ground on your list, even though you picked somebody who was pretty different than you were? Yeah. And I would expect if there's some validity to this list that in fact many of us would find common ground. What are some of the things you talked about? What were some of the things that made a difference as a kid growing up?
Family.
Family. How many of you talked about families? You know, this is not news to any of you, but not all assets are created equal, and the single best predictor on this list of whether kids make it or not, academically and in their life, is whether they come from strong, loving, supportive families. Okay? I know that's not news to any of you. And in a perfect world, all of our kids would come from strong, loving, supportive families. And you all know, by the nature of your work and from your work, you know that this isn't a perfect world. But I want to remind you that even kids who come from families that are really messed up, many of them make it. You can't give up on them because their family's a mess, and you can't expect less of them. But it does mean that they may need a little more support because they're not getting it from home, and they need adult support in their life, all right? So don't expect less. It may take more work to get them to where we need to get them, okay? What else did you talk about? In addition to families, what did you talk about? What made a difference?
Adult relationships, adult role models.
How many of you talked about other adults in your life? Yeah. The second best predictor on this list, anybody talk about school as you were going through this? And the adults at school who made a difference for us? Here's what I can tell you. The second best predictor after family on this list, the second best predictor is whether they are connected to school. Why are we talking about this today? Because you're the second best predictor of whether they make it or not. Because the connection to school is not a connection to the physical facility. I mean, you have beautiful facilities in this district, at least the ones that I've gone to. But you know, kids don't come to school and go, whoa, look at the lighting in here. I think I'll hang out here for another couple years. It's not the facility. It's the people that they are connected to. It's the adult staff members and their peers that are the second best predictor of whether they're going to make it or not. And when I say adult staff members, I want to make sure you hear what I'm saying. I'm not just talking about certificated staff. You know, we have consistently undervalued, I think, the contribution that our classified staff make to the healthy development of kids. Bus drivers, custodians, food service workers, school secretaries. I was reminded of this. I did a workshop in the Saugus School District in Southern California, and at break time, they gave an award to one of their custodians. He's the night custodian in an elementary school. I'm not sure the kids would know him if they saw him on the street because he's in the building after hours, after kids have gone home. But here's what he did. He spray painted a dustpan gold. He calls it the Golden Dustpan Award. He leaves it in the classroom each evening that is the cleanest classroom. Children compete to get the Golden Dustpan Award because he leaves it with cookies. The kids in this building call him the Cookie Monster. They write notes to the Cookie Monster. He writes notes back. And when he got this award, he said, I can't believe you're giving me an award for doing this. He said, I don't work as hard as I used to. Because the kids are cleaning the classroom. And he said, and the cookies are cheap. They're not any good. But they're writing me notes. I write them back. They're writing more. He said, I think that's good. Do you think he's an asset builder? Oh, yeah. I visited a playground aide and talked with a playground aide in LA Unified School Districts who's programmed into her cell phone the home phone numbers of about a dozen kids who are bad actors on the playground. And now whenever she sees one of those kids doing something approximately right, she will call them over and say, Jerome, I'm really proud of you for what you just did. She said, I'm going to call your mom and just tell her what I saw you doing today. I think she'd be proud too. So calls, has it programmed into her cell phone, calls home, leaves a message for mom saying, I'm really proud of your son for what he did today, and here's what I saw him doing, and I know you'd be proud of him too. Just thought I'd let you know. She said, you would be surprised now how many of these dozen kids who have a history of being bad actors on the playground now will come up and do things in front of me that are kind and thoughtful, hoping like hell that I call their parents. And she said, and I do, and you know what? The playground is different this year, okay? So I want you to think, what else did you talk about? In addition to school and parents and families, what else did you talk about? What made a difference?
Generation.
Yeah, being a part of a faith community. Anybody talk about that? Yeah, here's what I can tell you. The research says it makes a difference. But it does not say that Baptists do better than Catholics. It doesn't say that Christians do better than Muslims. What it says is children who grow up as a part of a faith community do better. And there are several reasons when you look at that research closely, including most faith communities are intergenerational communities where young people and adults interact in a positive way. That's really important to the healthy development of kids. Most faith communities, again, Christian and non-Christian, have a set of core values that are very similar, things like honesty and compassion. And then add faith on top of that. Yes, in fact, it does make a difference. So I just thought it would be important this morning just to go through this list and reflect on your own experience with this. Now, the first thing I can tell you, as much as I love this list, let me just tell you where I think it may have some limitations. And the first is, the list is not complete. Not everything that a child needs is on this list, although I think it's a great starting point. Let me give you some examples. There's nothing about physical health on this list. Nutrition, exercise, we know those really make a difference. Not on the list. Work ethic isn't on the list. I happen to believe that kids who work hard do better than the kids who don't. Anybody else think that's true? Not on the list. Sense of humor isn't on the list. You probably already picked this up. I think it's important that we laugh. I happen to believe the kids that laugh at themselves do better. Anybody think that's true? I don't have a lot of research that supports that, although there is some. But I asked a group of high school kids recently, what's missing from this list? You know what they told me? Pets. And this young man laughed when he said it. I said, why do you think that's important? He said, well, my dog loves me no matter what I do. So really this morning is about becoming the person that your dog thinks you are. Because if you were as good, if you were really as good as your dog thinks you are, you'd be better, okay? Now, if the second best predictor on this list is whether they are connected to school, I want you to look back at this list for a moment. Notice there are percentages out in the right-hand column. Everybody see that? Search Institute has surveyed over 3.5 million young people, 6th grade through 12th grade, to measure their asset levels. What you see in the right-hand column are the percentage of young people nationally who report having that asset in their life. And it's a pretty sophisticated instrument. It's a 156-item questionnaire. They don't just ask, do your parents love and support you? They ask a series of questions about what's going on in your family, what's going on at school, and so forth. And based on their responses, they're either judged to have that asset or not have that asset. Okay? And notice the first one. 68% of young people nationally say they have high levels of love and support. But notice the second one. Less than a third of kids say they can talk with their parents about the things that are really important in their life. This is our report card. We're always interested in how they do on their report card. This is our report card. How are we doing as adults and as communities? So as a school community, the one I want you to really pay attention to, look at number 5 on this list. If the second best predictor is whether they are connected to school, what percentage of young people nationally say they go to school in a caring school climate? Less than a third, 29%. I live on Bainbridge Island, Washington, west of Seattle. We moved there because of the schools. We have terrific schools. We're one of 800 communities who've surveyed our kids. And what I can tell you in my community, 32% of our kids say they go to school in a caring school climate. Okay? That was devastating to our staff. They wouldn't believe the data. So they asked me to do focus groups because they didn't believe it. So if you can imagine, I have 20 high school students sitting in a circle. I have the faculty from the high school, middle schools, and elementary schools standing on the outside in a big auditorium like this, looking in just to hear what the kids have to say. And I asked the kids, why is that number so low? See, it's the numbers don't tell you what the kids are really trying to say. It's the dialogue that begins to illuminate this. The first kid said, you want to know why that number's so low? He said, our elementary experiences were a whole lot more asset-rich than our secondary experiences. The teachers cared about us as people at the elementary grades. They care about their subject matter at the secondary level. I want you to think about this for a moment. I never would have thought of that. I mean, it didn't come to my mind immediately, but the kids brought it to our attention. And remember, their perception is their reality, whether you agree with it or not. I think you're going to have to work hard to overcome that perception on the part of a number of kids, because I believe many people in this room care a whole bunch about children and young people that you work with. But sometimes their perception is you care more about your subject matter than you do them, okay? The second thing I asked was, I asked the kids, again, asked that question, and the second kid said, caring school climate isn't just about how adults treat us here at school, it's also about how kids treat one another. And kids pick on each other at the middle school level a lot. For those of you who are middle school staff in here, and you know that's true, and so it's not just how you treat them, it's how they treat each other that determines how they feel about their school and their connectedness to school. The third kid said it clearer than anybody else, really courageous young lady. She said, I have 3 great teachers in the morning, and then I have to go to 4th period. She said, I hate to come to school because of 4th period. I'm not the only one that feels that way, and I have 2 great teachers after that. This guy ruins our day every day. And she said, he picks on kids, he makes fun of kids, he's mean. And she said, if you were serious about this, you wouldn't let him teach here. Whoa. Now you came up with a new strategy that morning. Here's our strategy. Feed the staff so they don't eat the kids. I'm serious. If you're an administrator in this room, if you're an administrator, building principal, assistant principal, I believe your job is to build assets for your staff so that they can be there the way they need to be there this year. Okay? The kids know when your tank is empty and they know when your tank is full. You need to be pretty full to do this job and do it well. You need to fill each other up. And if you're nodding your head and you're thinking this is the job of administration, yeah, it is, but it's not just the job of the administration. You want this to be a better year for your kids and for you personally? Take better care of one another. Again, perfect time of the year to talk about this for a moment. Give thanks for what we've got, but also I want you to take better care of one another. I want you to engage in here's your second assignment. On that list of to-dos, here's your second assignment. I want you to engage in random acts of asset building with fellow staff members. Okay? And if you don't know what a random act of asset building looks like, it's just the same as a random act of kindness. Letting people know what you appreciate about them. Tell them when you see them doing a great job, letting them know that you saw that. Being supportive. I gave this assignment in Sacramento not too long ago. I had a group going out to lunch. I said, I want you to go to lunch, and I want you to go sit with your colleagues at lunch, and I want you to engage in random acts of asset building. So I sent them out, and I said, you're going to have to report back after lunch what you did. So I sent them out. They come back. We're riding in an elevator back up to the conference room, and a woman in the elevator taps me on the shoulder, and she said, I'm really enjoying this workshop. You're doing a terrific job. And it didn't sound real sincere. And the guy behind her said, you just did your assignment, right? Random act of asset building. And she blushed, so I know we kind of caught her in the process. So here's what I want you to understand, that a random act of asset building is different than a spontaneous act of sucking up. Really, it needs to be genuine, and it needs to be thoughtful, and it needs to be done, and we don't do it often enough. Take better care of one another. Here's why this is so important. Look at this list of 40 again. Everybody get it out. Is this a list of what kids need? Yeah, I think it's a list of what human beings need. Help me out here. How many of you still need love and support in your life? Good, almost half. How many of you still need positive communication between your colleagues and co-workers and the administration and young people that we work with? Yeah. How many of you want positive role models that you can look up to and believe in these tough times that face our nation ahead? This is not a list of what children need. This is a list of what human beings need. So I really think that we don't spend enough time. If you want to move from good to great, it's about taking better care of one another. Because many of you are doing a lot to take care of the kids, but you haven't taken care of one another, okay? Now, let me share with you why this becomes so important. If you turn another page or two back, I think it's one page back, you're going to see a series of bar graphs. And here's what I want you to notice. Look at the bottom set of bar graphs. Third one over, the bottom left-hand corner, it's labeled illicit drug use. Everybody find that? Here's why this is so important and why we're talking about it today. The average kid in America today reports having 19 of these 40 assets in their life, 19. You might wonder, what difference does that make? Here's the difference. Those kids who have between 0 and 10, 1 in 10 assets, okay? If you look at the blue bar, it represents illicit drug use. Those kids who have between 0 and 10 assets, 38% of them, these are 6th graders through 12th graders, report being involved in illicit drug use. 38%. But look at the next category over. Those children who have between 11 and 20, just 10 more, drug use drops by more than half. It drops from 38% to 18%. And look at the next category over. Those kids who have between 21 and 30, it drops again from 18% to 6%. And young people who had over 30, only 1% were engaged in illicit drug use. That's a huge difference, from 38% to 1%. Here's what I want you to pay attention to. Look at the pattern. Don't just look at drug use. It doesn't matter whether we're looking at drug use, early sexual activity, violent behavior. Here's what I can tell you. The higher the level of assets in the lives of your students, the less likely they are to be involved in any of these high-risk behaviors. Why do I want you to do this? Because you can dramatically decrease high-risk behavior by building assets with kids. And as much as that's important, there's a second group of bar graphs. Look at the top set of bar graphs. They're even more important in my mind. Success in school, maintaining good health, valuing diversity. I was doing a workshop with parents and staff at a middle school not too long ago, and I asked them, what do you want your kids to look like at age 25? If we've done a really nice job as parents and school staff, what would your kids look like at age 25? And one of the moms in the audience said, I want my girls to be safe and drug-free. And I thought about that for a minute. Don't get me wrong, we have 2 daughters. I want them to be safe and drug-free. But I know kids who are safe and drug-free who are sitting on their butts at home at 25 doing nothing. That's not my definition of success, the absence of disease. Think we could set the bar a little higher here? I think it's about giving back to their communities. I think it's about still learning. It's about pursuing their goals. So what I do like about this model is you get 2 for 1. By building assets, you get higher levels of thriving and at the same time lower levels of high-risk behavior on the part of children. Now, so having said all that, I want to just wrap up the research part of this because I want to jump into how to do this. But before I do that, how many of you have time to focus on 40 more things this year? Seriously, when you look at this list, how many of you see your work on this list? Yeah, how many of you are building positive values with kids as you do your work? How many of you are trying to nurture a commitment to learning, reading for pleasure? When you look down this list, I don't think this is news to you. In fact, I think there's a whole lot of this going on already. All I'm trying to get you to think about this morning is how can you be more deliberate and intentional in doing the work? Because I believe it's already going on here, all right? I don't believe this is a vast wasteland. I think you know this is important. So now, in order to help you be a little more deliberate and intentional, I want to talk for just a moment about the connection between these assets and our primary mission, which is academic achievement and performance. Here's what I can tell you. You know, some of you may be thinking, well, this is nice to do, but we've got to get kids to higher levels of achievement. I'm with you. Here's what we know. Asset building is a single strategy. 7 school districts that we're working with right now. These include Houston, Texas, La Habra, California, St. Louis Park, Minnesota, Colorado Springs, Colorado, Jackson County, Michigan. We're working with 7 school districts, and we're monitoring asset levels and academic achievement, all right? And here's what I can tell you. Here's the good news. We just finished a 5-year study in the St. Louis Park School District where we were able to follow individual students, not cohorts, but individual students over a 5-year period of time, measuring their asset levels and looking at their grades. Here's what we found. 2 pieces of good news in this study. The first is, by being deliberate and focusing more on building these assets, you can in fact increase kids' asset levels. That's the first piece of good news. The second piece of good news, for every asset that a young person gained in the St. Louis Park study, the average increase in their GPA was 0.2 of a point for every asset. That's huge. Those of you who know GPA as a measure know it's pretty stable, not easily moved. What I'm saying is if you can increase a child's assets by 5, which is a big increase, the average increase you would expect to see in GPA is 1 full point. From a 3.3 or from a 2.3 to a 3.3, okay? And that's deceptive, because what we do know is the kids who had very low levels of assets, you take a kid who had 6 or 7 of these and you add just a couple to their list, the behavior change that you will see is it's dramatic and profound. For kids who have 29 of these, if you add 2 more, you'll still see a change. It's just not very dramatic. What I'm saying is your most vulnerable kids will gain the most from even modest increases in assets, all right? Now, if that has your attention, and you don't have time to focus on all 40, my co-author in this first book is Peter Scales, who's a researcher at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Peter looked at this data and said, you know what? These cluster to be better predictors of academic achievement and success. He said kids who have this first list of 5, and I'm talking about all 5 of these 5, not 2 of the 5, not 3 of the 5, all 5, kids who had all 5, which are assets 9, 17, 18, 19, and 25, they were 3 times more likely to be academically successful than their peers that did not have all 5. 3 times more likely. Notice that several of these assets are assets that schools are not going to deal with directly. But it's important, I think you know this information. So it's information I certainly would share with parents and families, and some of these you do have control over, reading for pleasure and others, okay? Look at the second group of 5. There were a second group of 5 of these that were almost as powerful, not quite as powerful as the first group. Young people who had this second group of 5, which are assets 15, 20, 22, 31, and 36, they were twice as likely to be academically successful. The first group, 3 times more likely. The second group, twice as likely. So if you were to say to me, if I can't do it all, what would you recommend? Well, what I would recommend is you might want to take a look at these 10 and pick 1 or 2 that you personally are committed to making happen with kids. I don't think you can do 10 well, and I'm not suggesting you try and do 10. But if each of us picked 1 or 2 of these and said, every kid who goes through my classroom is going to come out of that with an appreciation or with some gain in this particular asset, again, I think we would do better. You don't have to do all 40, and you don't have to do it with all kids, all right? But I do think you need to be deliberate and intentional. I'm trying to give you some direction here. Now, having said all that, we could spend the entire session on data, but what I want to do is spend the last half here on how do you do this. Because if this is making sense, and I'm hoping it is, and many of you knew and believed this already before you walked in this room, the real question is how do you do this, and how do you do it a little more deliberately and intentionally. So I'm going to try and give you some how-tos, some strategies. And before I do that, again, I think there's a lot of wisdom in this room, so help me out here. How many of you can think of an adult who made a difference for you, someone in school who made a difference for you as a kid growing up? Raise your hand high. Look around this room. Look around. Look how many hands are up. This is always interesting for me to do. How long ago were these people in your lives? Most of you didn't hesitate for a second. When I said, how many of you can think of somebody, you did this. Many of us are in this room today because of those people. Does that make sense? For me, it was Mrs. McClellan, my 7th grade social studies teacher, who took me aside one day outside of class, no other kids around, and she said to me, I've seen your IQ test. She said, you're really bright, but you're not working up to your potential. She said, I'm going to expect more of you than I expect of other students. I'm going to work with you, but she said, together, you and I are going to a higher level this year. I worked incredibly hard for her that year. And then it occurred to me about 2 years later, we never took IQ tests. I have 4 brothers and sisters. We all went to the same school. None of us ever remember taking an IQ test. And to this day, I'm still wondering how many kids she took outside her classroom and told them the same thing she told me. I mean, I still remember walking back into class feeling sorry for the poor dumb kids in my class because I was so smart, right? She got me. My sister Mary would tell you, she's a physician, she would tell you, it was our school nurse at Gatewood Elementary who one day when she was in the office not feeling well, she said to the nurse, I want to be a nurse too, and the nurse said to her, why not a doctor? And she said it was the first time it ever crossed her mind that women could be doctors because she'd never seen one before. It's the little things that you do that make such a difference. Before we talk about how to do this, I think you know how to do this because many of us in this room today, because somebody did it for us. So here's what I want you to do really quickly with somebody sitting around you, or groups of 2 or 3 or 4, no more than 4. I want you to talk about the people who made a difference. What did they do? Why do you remember them 30 and 40 years later without hesitation? Boom. They must have done something pretty powerfully. I want you to talk with the people around you really quickly because, again, there's more wisdom in this room than I possess. I think you know what needs to happen because many of you are here because it happened for you. Talk about the people who made a difference in education. What did they do? Go. Thanks for doing that. I hate to interrupt this because the decibel level is high and people are a little animated. It's fun to talk about the people who made a difference. What did they do? Why do you remember them fondly 20, 30, 40 years later? What did they do? They cared. How did you know they cared?
They talked to you, spent time with you.
They spent time with us. Here's what I want you to understand. I think some staff members think kids don't respect adults anymore. I still believe they think you are really important. And when somebody they look up to and think is important, a teacher, spends even a little bit of your personal time talking with them, what is the message? That I must be important. If somebody I believe is important spends their time really listening to what I have to say, really getting to know who I am, I must be important, okay? So, yeah, they spent time. What else did these people do? They held us accountable and they challenged us, right? Yeah, and they held us to very high standards, and how many of us tried to meet those standards? Yeah. Why? See, I think you didn't want to let them down. I think it was nice to have an adult who believed in you and thought a lot of you, and you didn't want to let them down. How many of you have had this experience where kids will do things for you they will not do for anybody else? Why do you think they do that?
Because you asked them.
Sometimes because you ask them, but sometimes I think it's because they want to please you. And here's what I think. Our job is, here's how I perceive my job as a teacher. My job is to teach kids to behave their way to success. To behave their way to success. See, if I can get them to do certain behaviors consistently, they will in fact be successful. Work hard, turn in their homework, show up on time, really think critically about issues, they will be successful, all right? In the beginning, I don't care if they're doing it simply to please me. I need them to do it. I need them to do it consistently and have this become a habit, a way of doing things for them. In the end, yes, I want them to do it because they recognize it's in their best interest, but in the beginning, I don't care if they're doing it simply to please me. I want them to do it, all right? So, what else did these people do? Why do you remember them? You were talking.
They were involved.
They were involved. They got involved. They took a personal interest. Here's what I want you to know. I do too many of these presentations, and at the end, people come up and they think I'm just talking about being nice to kids. Well, my usual response is not a bad idea. Doesn't hurt, okay? But I'm talking about a whole lot more than being nice to kids. Let me see if I can describe this. I happen to believe there are levels of relationship. The first level looks like this. Your name is?
Paige.
Paige. The first level, level one looks like this. Good morning, Paige. Good to see you. I missed you in class yesterday. By the way, I loved your paper last week. It was terrific, and I can't wait to read the next one. Basic, positive social interaction. I expect this of all adult staff members who work in school. This level one behavior separates the beginning asset builders from the asses. Is that clear? The asses are the people who say, look, I don't have to greet kids warmly. That's not what I get paid for. I'm here to teach them. I teach social studies. You wouldn't last a day at Starbucks if you couldn't do this. Starbucks does this to sell you what? Coffee. What are we selling? See, I think we're selling the future for our kids. You think we could go to the lengths that Starbucks goes to sell you a cup of coffee because what we're selling is so much more important than what they're selling, okay? Here's my take on this. If you can't do level one, if you don't really like kids and you can't do level one, you need to find a new job. I don't think there's room in this profession for people who can't honestly greet kids warmly and make them feel welcome and accepted into our classrooms, because if they don't want to come here, it's really hard to teach them if they don't show up, right? So I think level one is essential. I expect this of all staff members who work with kids, all right? But the people who really made a difference, when you think about this, they went to a second level. They took a personal interest in us. They got to know things about us. There's a book out called Whale Done by Ken Blanchard, who is the author of The 1 Minute Manager. And he talks about how they train whales at SeaWorld to do what they do. And what I can tell you is, one of the things they do at SeaWorld is they say, let the whale be the teacher in the beginning. Some whales like their belly scratched, some like to play, some like food. They try and figure out in the beginning what this whale responds to the best, because when they figure that out, they're in a better position to influence them to do what they need them to do. I'm not talking about doing it because it's nice, it's necessary. The people we saw doing this really well went to level 3 with kids. They figured out what was right. And sometimes you have to look really hard. I know there are some really challenging kids. I'm working with some gang-involved kids in East Los Angeles. I don't think I was doing my best work in the beginning. But I finally figured out these kids are street smart, they're charismatic. I happen to believe many of them were leaders first and gang members second. I also believe if they went in a different direction, other kids would follow them. They are so charismatic. And when I figured that out, it gave me the energy to fix what's wrong. They're clearly going in the wrong direction. But you need to figure out what's right because it gives you the energy to fix what isn't. Okay? And here's, I've sat in too many faculty lounges where people say things about kids like, that kid's a loser, or, you know, that kid's a real bad news bear, whatever. And then somebody else, you'll say to them, well, I think he has a lot of potential, and they'll say, well, I'll believe it when I see it. You know what? That's not the way this works. It actually works the other way around. You will see it when you believe it. If you believe this kid is a bad news bear, you're going to see indicators every day you're right. If you believe this kid has a whole lot of unrealized potential, you will see indicators every day you are right. The way this really works is you will see it when you believe it. Okay? So you got to believe that, and you got to look hard. And here's what I want you to do. With the kids who are really struggling right now in your classroom, I want you to reward them when they do things approximately right. Don't wait for them to do it exactly the way you want them to do it before you acknowledge any of their work. I want you to think about how they train whales to do things at SeaWorld. Do they teach them to jump through hoops outside of out of the tank by holding a hoop up over the tank, hoping like hell one day a whale will jump through it accidentally? No, what they do is they start out by stretching a rope underwater. If the whale makes an approach towards the rope, they're given a reward. They're not given a reward again until they make the same approach or closer. Please don't hear in what I'm saying right now that I suggest that you let them get by with half-baked stuff. I'm not suggesting that for a moment. But in the beginning, for kids who are struggling, you need to reward them when they do things approximately right, and then don't reward them again until they make progress from that point. You reward approximate behavior and progress, and then progress, and then progress. And eventually, what they have is a whale jumping through hoops out of water. That's not normal behavior for whales, and it's not normal. Many of the kids have never done what you're asking them to do. They're afraid, and they've not had much success. You need to reward approximate behavior and then progress. Okay? The staff we saw doing this really well, they challenge kids. But the first thing I want you to understand is develop the relationship first and then challenge. Relationship first, challenge second, because once you have a connection with this kid, they will do things for you they will not do for anybody else. But if you challenge them out of the chute and they have no relationship with you and they don't know you and you don't know them, they're not interested in meeting the challenge. Relationship first, challenge second. And the staff that we saw really making a difference, they not only focused on what was right, they then figured out what they could add that would make this kid more complete and more successful. That's our job. Not just saying, hey, you're really good at this, and just nurturing the things that they're good at. It's adding to that list. I'll give you a quick example. I have a nephew. His name is Tony. He was the brightest little boy I'd ever seen at age 5. They lived in Hawaii at the time. They came to visit, and he loved my garage door opener. He'd never seen one of those before. They didn't have a garage. I would let him open the garage door with a garage door opener when we go in and out. And one day I said, hey, Tony, you need to be careful because if someone's standing out of the door and it comes down and hits him in the head, it could really hurt him. He said, Uncle Clay, if they were a Pachycephalosaurus, it wouldn't hurt. He's 5. I said, Tony, I knew a little bit about dinosaurs, but I said, what is a Pachycephalosaurus? He said, it's like a Triceratops. It has more bony plates on its head, though. He was this bright little boy, and he grew into the elementary grades. He was still this really bright little kid, but he didn't get along well with other children. He made fun of kids that weren't as smart as he was. And in the 5th grade, his 5th grade teacher took my sister aside at a parent conference and said, I don't know how much I'm going to teach him this year because he's incredibly bright, but I am going to work on his social skills this year because unless he learns to get along with other kids, he's never going to reach his full potential. She did great things for him that year. As an example, kids had questions in the classroom, no one knew the answer. Tony could find the answer on the internet. Teacher would say, Sarah, that's a great question, and no one knows the answer, so why don't you and Tony go find the answer? And Tony, you need to teach Sarah how to do what you know how to do, because he could find anything. So he became this class resource, and any time that year he did things that were socially inappropriate, made fun of other kids, she would make him redo those interactions in ways that didn't hurt other kids' feelings. She would coach and cue him and make him redo that. Well, the short of the story is Tony graduated from Stanford 2 years ago. I never doubted he could go to Stanford. He has a girlfriend right now. I doubted that. He was the captain of the ultimate Frisbee team at Stanford. I doubted that. See, what this teacher did is she figured out not only what was right, but what she could add that would make him more complete and more successful. The reason I'm giving you this list of levels of relationship, I do not expect you to be at level 5 with every kid. I don't think that's realistic. I do expect you to be at level 1 and to push it. If you're at level 1, push for 2. If you're at 2, push for 3. Okay? Because the deeper the relationship, the more influence you got, and that's what we get paid for. Now, in order to do this, let me see if I can give you some strategies really quickly here, and we've got about 15 minutes to do this. Okay. The first is, I'm going to take some of the asset categories. Let's take category 1, which is love and support. You want to know how to get closer and support kids? The first thing I would suggest you do is, I want everybody to think about a kid you're struggling with right now. Everybody got one? The first question I would ask you is, do you know their love language? Do you know what I'm talking about? There are 2 authors. Their names are Campbell and Chapman. They have a series of books out on love languages. It's their contention, and their work was initially done with couples on marriage retreats. It was their contention that couples had problems in their relationship if they didn't speak the same love language. If you're a toucher and your spouse is not, or your partner is not, you're thinking, if he really loved me, he'd just be a little more affectionate. He's thinking, I'm such a good guy. I remember every anniversary. I give her nice gifts. I'm really kind. I'm a really good guy. And she's thinking, if he really loved me, he'd just be more affectionate. Does this sound... You don't have to raise your hand if this is your relationship, okay? I don't need to know that. That's more information that I need to know. So, kids have love languages too. The first is physical touch. Kids will give you indicators. This is a kid who walks into class and gives you a high five. This is a kid you're sitting at your desk and they kind of invade your personal space, okay? And I know for the many of the men in this room, we have been told you don't touch kids because of all the visibility that has been given to pedophiles. You know what? I think that's BS. You know the difference between appropriate touch and inappropriate touch. I can give a kid a high five. I can give a kid a pat on the back. I can give him a hug from the side. It doesn't need to be a full body hug when no one else is in the room. Don't be stupid. And kids will give you indications whether they're comfortable or not comfortable. But some of them read that as that's how they know you care. Until you do that, for some kids, they're not reading that you really care, okay? How many of you know the kids who love words of affirmation? Okay? You say something positive, they light up. We did a project in Kansas. See if I can find this here. Well, we developed pre-printed Post-it notes with positive messages on them, and they're sentence stems, and all the teacher had to do was complete the sentence. I'm delighted when you complete the sentence. I noticed something really special about you today. It is complete the sentence. You have no idea how much you helped me when. They had these all on their desk, and teachers began putting these on students' work when they turned back assignments, or when kids walked in the classroom, there was a note on their desk. The kids who loved words of affirmation would look at their assignment. Many of them would throw it in the trash, but they'd pull a Post-it note off first and put it in their folder. They weren't going to throw that away. Okay? And then how many of you know the kids who want your time? You're trying to leave for the day, and you can't get out of there because they got you cornered. And see, what they're thinking is, if you really care, you give me more time. Okay? And then, how many of you know the kids who love gifts? I'm not talking about big things, I'm talking about little things. By the way, anybody thinking about your own kids right now? Again, this is a perfect time of year, this weekend, over the Thanksgiving holiday, to let people know what you appreciate about them and give thanks for the people in our life. Think about their love language and how you're going to communicate this to them, okay? But I have 2 daughters, and I can tell you my oldest is a gift kid. And my youngest is a physical toucher, okay? And so when I used to do this work on the road, I would come home and I'd open the door, and Emily would come running up and jump into my arms and wanted to cuddle and snuggle. And Amy would run up and say, "Daddy," and I would bring her back soap and shampoo from motel rooms. I know this is weird. And I didn't get it because I'm not a gift guy. You tend to do what you're comfortable doing. But I would do it because she liked it, and she would run up and say, Daddy, did you bring me soap? Yeah, I did. There it is. I didn't get it, and finally I realized it wasn't the soap. What the soap represented is she knew I thought about her while I was gone. So for your kids who love those gifts, I'm not talking about big things. Some of them know that you think about them. That's what they know when you give them a gift, okay? And then how many of you know the kids who love acts of service? They're struggling with a problem. You stick around after school and help them noodle it out. You go to a performance they're involved in, they're in the school play, you go and watch them and you let them know how proud you are of their performance, or they're involved in an athletic event. You go watch their game and let them know on Monday, I went to the game, I watched you every play. You did a great job, okay? I just want you to think about how do you communicate to kids that you really care, and sometimes it's by making sure you speak their love language, which means you need to speak multiple languages, even though it may not be your first language, all right? Second is, I want to talk about 4 forms of feedback that you can give kids, and really 2 that I want you to do and 2 that I don't want you to do. The first, let me talk about what I don't want you to do. I see a lot of adult staff members ignore. They ignore kids when they're doing things that are inappropriate because it's just too much work to deal with them, and they're not in my class, and they're out in the hallway, and I'm not going to deal with this right now. I ignore it. And you ignore kids when they're doing the right thing because that's what you expect them to do. That's what they're supposed to do. Don't ignore it. It's not a good strategy. Yeah, pick your battles. Don't pick every little thing, but the things that are important, don't ignore. The second thing, I see a lot of staff do gotchas. They don't say anything to kids when they're doing the right thing. That's what you expect. But man, when they do the wrong thing, you jump on them, okay? Don't do gotchas. It's not a great way to operate. By the way, they don't do gotchas to whales at SeaWorld because if you do a gotcha to a whale, it could do a gotcha back. And we saw some evidence of what happens this year, okay? And not that trainer was doing a gotcha, but in fact, they're incredibly powerful. So they don't do gotchas at SeaWorld. They do 2 things. One is they accentuate the positive with the animals that they're working with. And I want you to do the same. I know sometimes it's really frustrating. My background is teaching at the secondary level. I know they're frustrating. I hear staff all the time saying, what was he thinking? Great read. If you're looking for a book that helps you with all of this, there's a book called The Primal Teen by Barbara Strauch. It's a summary of teenage brain research. What it says, and here's how they do this, by looking at MRI technology, or by using MRI technology, they expose adults and teens to the same stimuli, and they can look at what centers of the brain are active and which centers are communicating with other centers. Their creative centers are terrific. They're bigger than our centers. They're more active than our centers. They're more creative than we are. Their frontal lobe, which controls reason and judgment, is not well developed nor well connected with any other centers in their brain. Their consequential thinking sucks. And how many of us made some bad choices when we were 15 or 16 years old? We forget that, and when we make a lot of judgments about kids, they look like young men and young women, they look physically mature, and so you expect them to act that way, and I want you to have high expectations for them. I also want you to be a bit forgiving because some of us made bad decisions, and their consequential thinking is not good. You want to know how to help them? Hang in there and act as their frontal lobe while they're developing one. You need to think out loud for them so they can hear what an adult thought process sounds like and model consequential thinking for your kids. They will do better if they have adults modeling it around them. Now, I also want you to, so the 2 things I want you to do, focus on the positive. I think the 3-to-1 ratio is really important. 3 positive comments for every negative or redirecting comment that you do with kids. They don't hear it every time you say it. And you might think you're overdoing it. The research says it will not hurt them, and you need to focus. Whenever you see them do things right, let them know. But what I want to talk about for just a moment, one skill really quickly before you leave, redirecting kids. When they do things that are inappropriate, I think the challenge is, how do you continue to be an asset builder when kids are doing things that are really inappropriate? Okay? So let me just see if I can give you a quick example. Your name is?
Megan.
Megan, and your name is?
Sarah.
Sarah. I see Megan push Sarah in the hallway. So I walk up to Megan in front of all of her friends here, and I say something like, Megan, how many times do I have to tell you? We don't do that here at South. You having a hard time hearing because didn't we talk about this last week? That's a gotcha. There are 2 messages here. What are the 2 messages? First is you're bad because I have to talk to you about this all the time. The second is you're stupid because I talked to you about this before and you're not doing it. Add to the fact that all of her friends are standing here and I embarrassed her in front of her friends. When you embarrass a kid in front of their friends, what are they likely to do? come back at me to save face. I just set up a situation where this could escalate and get ugly. Don't do gotchas. That's a gotcha. Same situation. Megan pushes Sarah. Is that right? I got this right? Whenever possible, I want you to take them aside, not in front of other kids. It looks like this. Megan, could we talk for a second? I would pull her aside. I might say, Megan, I was surprised when you pushed Sarah. That's not like you. I mean, you're the best in our class. Our 2 new kids that we had at the beginning of the semester, you were really good at making them feel welcome. That just seemed out of character. What was going on? She says, you didn't see it all. You know, Sarah pushed me first. You need to talk to Sarah. And if I think Sarah had something to do with it, what I would say to Megan in this case is, I can understand why that would make you mad. That would make me mad too. But what you did didn't work. So I want to know, can you show me a better way of dealing with that next time? See, we're good at telling them what to do. I want to know if she knows how to handle it. Can you show me? If she can't, I might say, Megan, would you like me to share with you how I've seen other people handle that? And I'll show her what I want her to do. And the last is, thanks, Megan. Thanks for listening. I know you're going to do it differently next time. What's the message now?
Response here.
I see you up here. That behavior was beneath you. I expect a different level, and I know you're capable of doing it differently. Here's what I want you to do. Stand up really quick, face a partner. Anybody in this room, really quickly. Here's why I want you to do this. I would be guilty of what I'm telling you not to do if I didn't have you do this for a second. See, in America, here's what we do with kids. We say things to them like, just say no. That's like saying to someone who's clinically depressed, just have a nice day. What's the question in the kid's mind? How? So unless you're empowering kids by showing them how, I don't think we're doing our job. And I'm not empowering you by saying, hey, just do this with kids. Here's what I want you to do really quickly. This is a skill. It has steps. Let me actually tell you, the first step in this skill is, how many of you have seen kids that do things that make you really angry? And they're really unkind things that they do to other kids? When you see that, and if you're angry, the first thing, before you even try this skill, I want you to get yourself under control. You won't do your best work when you're really angry. And by the way, how many of us have kids in our classroom who have problems with anger management and impulse control? They need somebody. The best way to teach children is to model. If you want them to be respectful, model it. If you want them to be hardworking, model it. If you want them to have integrity, model it. If you want them to control their emotions, you model it too. So I think it's really powerful to say to a child when they do something that really is unkind and you're mad, to say, I'm really angry about what just happened, and I'm going to get myself under control before I talk with you, but I'll talk with you in just a minute. Do you understand what you're modeling there? That adults get mad too. It's not okay to go off on people, okay? Get yourself under control. Then take them aside whenever possible, using their name. Even if I see a kid in the hallway and I don't know them, I can walk up and say, hi, I'm Mr. Roberts, and you are?
Lori.
Lori, nice to meet you. Could we talk for just a second? Okay. Express the feeling. In this case, I said, Megan, I was surprised. Don't say you were surprised if you weren't surprised. You've seen them do it often. They have a built-in BS detector, okay? I could say, I was disappointed, okay? But use an I message. Focus on the behavior you want, not the behavior you don't want. So let them know what the inappropriate behavior which is when you pushed Lori, that was the problem, okay? Or when you pushed Sarah. That was the problem. Indicate it's not like them. Whenever you've seen them doing something kind and thoughtful, this is the time to throw in the example. You were really good with the kids at the beginning of the year, okay? You can ask at any point, what just happened here? But I do want to know her side of this, you know? Well, Sarah is the one who started this, okay? And model, can you show me a better way? And the last is thank you. One step you can add to this, and you have this in your packet, one step you can add is if this is a repeat offense, consequences goes right before thank you, which is remember what we agreed would happen if this happened again. We are going to follow through with that, but I still want to thank you for listening. Now, really quickly, tallest member of this group of 2, you're the kid. Shortest member of this group of 2, you're the staff member.
All right.
Now, please, I want you to pick a behavior that you see often among kids that you work with. And it should be an everyday, not a heavy-duty deal. I just knifed a kid in the hallway isn't a good role play, okay? So, when I say go, tallest member of this group of two, I want you to tell them how old you are, not in real life, but I'm a sophomore. I just swore at a kid in the hallway in front of a staff member. And so then I want you to be a cooperative student because I want the staff member to be able to go through these steps. So you might want to position yourself so you can see the screen. The other thing I want to give you is permission. There's a lot of wisdom in this room. Some of you have developed techniques that work well for you that are not on the screen. Feel free to customize. 2 goals. The behavior needs to change. It's inappropriate. The relationship needs to stay strong with this child. Everybody got it? You're not successful unless you get both. The relationship stays strong, the behavior changes. As soon as I say go, you role play, it goes boom, 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 switch roles, so each of you has a chance to practice one time. Go. Have a seat. Now, I just need a little feedback. How did it go? This is, with your thumbs, this is, it went pretty well. This is a little shaky. This is, man, this is hard. I just need to see how it went. I'm worried some of you don't have thumbs. Okay, so you do. Okay, so most of you here, if this is not the way you would normally do this, I understand. But I think the whole idea today is about trying to figure out maybe doing things just a little differently than we always do them with kids in order to get different results, all right? Last strategy, some Post-it notes are going down the aisle. I want you to take 3 Post-it notes and pass them on. Everybody take 3 and pass them on. We're going to wrap this all up. And in your packet of materials, if you turn back, you'll find a bit of the research on the connection between assets and achievement. You're going to find the levels of relationship piece. And right at the very back of your packet, you're going to find a handout entitled Asset Building Affirmations. This is a strategy I use with my students to help them change their behavior, and so I'm going to ask you to do this as a strategy to change your behavior, and you can use it with your students as well. Whenever I'm trying to get a student to do something differently, and we agree that it's a good idea for them to do that differently, I have them write an affirmation. You have an example of affirmations. They're written as if you were already doing them well. Let me give you an example. I want you to pick a behavior that you would like to do just a little better for the rest of this year than you've done so far this year. I have a hard time with names. I know I have a hard time with names. I know it's important that kids are known by name, and it's not, I remember the kids' names in my classroom, but I'll see a kid that I had two years ago in the hallway, and they'll walk up and say, "Hey, Mr. Roberts, how you doing?" And I'm going, oh man. And I hate it, so I know I need to work on it. So that might be one I'd pick, all right? But notice, we've just given you examples. Don't feel limited by these. These are simply examples. I want you to pick one behavior that you'd like to do just a little better than you're doing right now. And I'd like you to write that on the first Post-it note. So pick a behavior. Again, if you want to be a little more deliberate as an asset builder in the lives of your kids, you got to do some things a little differently. So pick one behavior you'd like to do better, write it on the first Post-it note, write the same behavior on the second Post-it note, write it one more time on the third Post-it note. When you get done, you will have 3 Post-it notes. They're all going to read the same behavior. Pick one, write it 3 times, each time on a separate Post-it note. It's at this point you're wishing you hadn't picked the one that has the most words. But you can abbreviate. Just make sure you capture it and write it 3 times, all right? Now, as you're writing this, let me tell you what I want you to do with these. Changing behavior is difficult. And you'll have more understanding about what it takes to change behavior if you're about changing your own. So here's what I've learned. The first is I'm more likely to change my behavior if I wake up tomorrow morning first thing and I say to myself, I am going to do a better job today with names. It's more likely it'll happen. First Post-it note that you wrote, I want you to place someplace at home where you will see it in the first 5 minutes of your day. On the alarm clock at home, on the mirror in the bathroom, on the coffee maker in the kitchen. I don't know where you spend the first 5 minutes of your day, and frankly, I don't want to know. But you do know where you can place it, where you will see it. See, you will forget come next Monday, what we talked about here today unless you have some reminders. So I need you to put it up, and I need you to leave it up for at least a couple of weeks. It takes time to change behavior. The second Post-it note, I want you to place it someplace where you will see it on the way to work and on the way home, on the dashboard of your car when you leave here today. The third Post-it note, place it someplace in your classroom or your workspace where you will see it often. If you're a computer user, put it on the top of your screen. Or if you have a planning book that you use regularly, put it on your planning book. The last thing I know about changing my behavior, I'm more likely to change my behavior if I publicly commit to it. So as you leave here today, I want you to tell a colleague, coworker, friend here in the room with you what you're going to focus on and do a little better. And then I want you to ask them for their support. So your name is?
Ray.
Ray. So if Ray and I work together and we're buddies, before I leave, I would say, hey, Ray, I'm going to do a better job with names. And Ray would share with me whatever he's going to work on. And then I want you to ask them for their support. So Ray, you're the first person I see when I come into the building each day. You always say hi to me. And the next couple of weeks, would you just ask me when you see me in the morning, how's it going with the names thing, Clay? Ray says I could do that, and then Ray would share with me. You're more likely to do it if you have publicly committed, and you're more likely to do it if your friends support you, okay? Now, last strategy. Several years ago, I was in my office. I got a call from a guy by the name of John Graham. He's a Harvard graduate and former CIA operative in Vietnam. He said, I want to come meet with you. Most of my professional experience, I've developed a lot of curriculum materials for schools. He said, I said, what do you want to meet about? He said, I want to teach children, young people to be courageous. As soon as he said that, he could have set the hook and reeled me in. I said, that's a great concept, John. But how do you teach young people to be courageous? He said, it's not that difficult. He said, it's a 3-step process. If you're interested in this concept, go to www.giraffe.org. It's the Giraffe Project. They've identified 750 people around the United States who stick their necks out and make a difference in their community. They call them giraffes because they have long necks and they stick them out on a regular basis. I said, give me an example of a giraffe. He said, well, there's a 13-year-old boy in the Midwest who fixed up a bicycle and donated it to a group home in his neighborhood. And when he got done, he came home and his mother could tell he was upset. And she said, what's the matter? Didn't the boys like the bike? He said, no, Mom, they like the bike. He said, but there were 18 boys in this group home and they had to stand in line to ride a bike. And he said, boys shouldn't have to stand in line to ride bikes. So he committed to fix up bikes. He fixes up, people drop off broken bikes at his house. He takes components from one, puts them on another, builds bikes that work and gives them to kids who don't have bikes. And he's 13. He's a giraffe. John said, I have 749 other stories. I could have spent the whole day with him. But I said, how do you teach kids to be courageous? How do you teach kids to make a difference? The first thing is tell stories. One of the reasons I wanted to do this is because I think we stop telling stories too early in young people's experience. You have wonderful stories to tell. Tell your stories to the kids, okay? If you liked anything that I did here today, probably part of it is because I told stories, okay? So to end with a story, you got to help them find the stories in their own community, in their own culture, in their own families, and let them tell the story. I was reminded of this about a month and a half ago. This has been a tough 2 years for me. Less than a year and a half ago, my mom passed away, and this year my sister passed away. And my mom lived in an assisted care facility where she had chronic lung disease. Her mind was really sharp, but she was confined to a wheelchair. So I bought her one of these power chairs, one of these Jazzies that has a joystick and you can drive it around. Now, my mom was a bad driver when she had a car. She was really dangerous with a joystick. And she would go down the hall scraping the paint off the wall, and she would go down the hall. And if she got in the elevator, people would get out, you know, because she was just out of control with this thing. But it did help her get around. And she would have lunch and dinner and breakfast each day with two other women at this assisted care facility, both of them in wheelchairs. Both of them had power chairs. I called this group the Three Musketeers. One day I went, so I'm cleaning up this chair because I was going to sell it on Craigslist because my sister, I saved it for my sister and she passed away, and I thought somebody will get some use out of this, and I just was reminded of this story. So my mom, I go to take her to lunch one day, and these two other women in the Three Musketeers group are beside themselves laughing and telling me the story. They said, you should have seen your mom this week. She said, one of the women said, she came down to dinner, and there's another man that comes to dinner each day. He's gnarly and surly, and he's just kind of mean-spirited. And the women, it's mostly women who work in this facility taking care of my mom and others, were wonderful to her, and they got paid minimum wage, and most of them were women of color. This guy would come down to dinner and make nasty comments about the staff, and one day he made a racist comment about one of the staff members, and my mom told him to shut up. And he's in a wheelchair, but he doesn't have a power chair, so he's shuffling, and he flips her the bird, and he keeps going. And the woman at the table said she went ballistic, so she grabs the water pitcher off the table, and she's in her power chair, and she does like a 360 and spills half of the water, and then she powers after him, and he's shuffling, she's powering, right? She catches up with him, and she dumps the water over him, to the cheers of staff and residents. So they'll tell me the story. So I take my mom out to lunch, and as we're walking by the front desk, the woman at the front desk says, Mrs. Roberts, when you get back, remember you need to sign the new code of conduct policy. I said, Mom, do you think this has anything to do with what you just did? She said, I don't care, he deserved it. It was her little act of courage. Even confined to this wheelchair, she said, I couldn't let him get by with that, okay? The last thing is, if you want your kids to be decent human beings, help them become the story. Provide opportunities for them to do courageous things. Give them the skills to pull it off, and reward them when they do it. It's opportunities, skills, and rewards. And when you do that, I think we'll have a better place for kids, because we need to involve young people as our partners in this work. It's not just what we do. In fact, if you're trying to reach a ninth grader, who's the most powerful messenger? 11th graders, they model about 2 years up in their behavior. And who learns the most when your 11th graders work with your 9th graders? Our research says the 11th graders learn more than the 9th graders. We need to involve young people as our partners in this work. We're over time. Here's what I would ask you to do. Here are your assignments really quickly. The first is take aside those incredibly resilient kids and let them know you see what's going on and ask them how they do what they do. The second is I need you to engage in random acts of asset building with fellow staff members. The third is I need you to put your Post-it notes up tonight before you go to bed, all right? And the fourth is I would ask you to pay it forward. If this is, we're not trying to create a program here, we're trying to create a movement to make this one of the best communities in the state of Nebraska, maybe one of the best communities in the United States for young people to grow up and for families to live. I think it's about making this an asset building community, and I think it already does a lot of that, but we could be more deliberate and intentional in the work. I would like to just end with a thank you. I'd like to thank you for what you already do for young people. I know there's too many smilers and nodders in this room. For many of you, all I did was reinforce you're not crazy. You do know what makes a difference. Just do it a little more deliberately and intentionally. Have a great Thanksgiving and a great rest of the year, okay?